Lord is Lord, as the potter's clay. Fire us, Lord, with your spirit today. Shape us, Lord, in the likeness of Jesus, your Son. So may his flock wake up to do what the good shepherd has begun. What the good shepherd has begun.
Hello, I'm Andy Johnson. Welcome to this new series here on Trinity TV as we talk with the Archbishop, His Grace, Archbishop Charles Jason Gordon, on a couple of things, how he sees his mission as the head of the church in Trinidad and Tobago in the Archdiocese, as well as how he sees the mission of the church itself. Before we get into that, let me just sort of apologize to the viewers who would be looking for the Shepherd's Corner in this time. We want to suggest to you that this will take its place for the next couple of weeks as we go through the schedule in these discussions with His Grace. So we want you to stay with us for the discussion. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, Andy.
All right. Well, let me start by asking you, so you've been named as Archbishop in this Port of Spain diocese about a year now. Let's talk a little bit about between that time and now, how has it been?
Busy. It's been full, it's been rich, it's been engaging, it's been quite a stretch in so many ways. I'm still the bishop for Barbados, or the administrator for Barbados, so I'm in Barbados once a month. So that means I'm only giving 3 weeks a month to Trinidad if there's no other travel to be done. So that has kept me quite on the focus of what has to happen, because this is a very big archdiocese.
Yeah.
61 parishes, 256 mass centers, 118 primary schools, 21 secondary schools. That's not a small number.
Yeah. And some of your responsibilities span all of those things.
Well, yes, all of that I am engaged in.
Yeah. Sometimes you're referred to as Archbishop of the Diocese of Port of Spain, and other times as Archbishop of Trinidad and Tobago. Some people may need to understand, the differentiation, if in fact there's a differentiation.
There a subtle one and an important one. In the Catholic Church, we name the diocese by the city, the principal city of that country, or the principal city of the town or village or wherever the diocese is. Because if you go to America, no one bishop, and they have 200 and something of them, could claim to be Bishop of America. So just to keep it uniform, you'd have the Bishop of Port of Spain, or you might have the Archbishop of Miami, you might have a bishop in Fort Lauderdale, you might have another one in Colorado. So it's the Catholic Church, we name it by the principal city.
Yeah, and so it makes a distinction, let's say, with the Anglican diocese, because the head of the church is the Bishop of Trinidad and Tobago.
Correct.
It doesn't mean that responsibility is greater than the Archbishop of Port of Spain. Yeah.
No, because it's the Archbishop of Port of Spain is responsible for the whole of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yeah.
Not just Port of Spain.
What would you say has been your most transformational experience since becoming the head of the church in this diocese?
I could name two.
Yeah.
With the floods, that was really an amazing moment for me. I think I touched Trinidad and Tobago at its absolute best. The people came out. People came out from every part of this country, every walk of life. People were helping in ways that were small and great. I saw kind of a spirit in Trinidad and Tobago that reminded me of my grandmother's generation, with that kind of generosity where they had no food in the pot, but a neighbor drops in and they get in food too, and that we're going to share everything we have. It also brought out a kind of a spirit in the country, and a connection and a communion in the country that allowed Trinidad to be something different from what it had become over the 40, 50 years before. And it was as if this thing that is really who we are kind of shine forth, to be seen, and that to me was one very powerful moment.
Yeah.
Because it did something to the country.
And it's what a journalist would call a kind of aha moment.
Yes.
Because we felt that we had lost that, and I think you probably would have been misunderstood some months before that when you made a statement which was carried in the media as you saying we have become too stingy or something like that.
Well, that was a throwaway comment, huh?
Yeah.
Because the question was a silly question. So I gave a silly answer and they made it headlines.
Yes.
But so I learned from that experience, no silly questions, no silly answers. So now I get a silly question, I just don't answer the question. Because I know that it is thing. And that was specific to the Venezuelan
Yes, it
and
was.
the refugee crisis, because we had kind of closed, and although we've been incredibly generous to Dominica after the hurricanes there, for some reason the refugee crisis thing tightened us up considerably.
Yeah. You think it's because of a lack of understanding and fear among us? It's in a period when we feel that we're not doing as good as we should, and then they have to assume these greater burdens with people coming here. I mean, not understandably, this idea that they're going to come and take up our space and
Have
take,
a woman and all the litany of challenges that it brings. Yes, and I think, in one sense, it's always much easier to do generosity when it's somewhere else.
Yeah.
But to open your home is a different kind of generosity. So if there's a poor person down the corner, I could pass and give him sandwich and I could give him, but to tell him come and live in my house, that's a kind of a disruption that is very, very different. And it requires a lot more thought and a lot more discernment. And I think the refugee crisis has pushed on us to what are the real limits of our generosity? What was the real limits of our hospitality? To take up Archbishop Emeritus Harris's big theme on hospitality.
Right. I mean, you think that you've seen any kind of shift in our attitudes over the intervening months to where we are now in terms of how we are prepared to, because you see in the paper more and more people, probably not enough, speaking out, having a kind of embracing attitude.
Shifting. It is shifting on many fronts. So I saw in the newspaper today a Venezuelan couple. He is a judge, she's a professional, living here, painting fences and working as a security guard and talking about the experience. Now, I don't know we'd have seen that so publicly in a newspaper back
some
months ago.
Yeah.
So it's starting to come to the fore. As the Prime Minister and myself have had a conversation on it, and I think we found some middle ground where we can move towards protecting the migrant and giving limited rights, and at the same time protecting the country and ensuring that we keep national security to the fore. So it's about finding these tight spaces where we can negotiate and operate to allow the deepest part of our humanity to come to the fore.
Yeah. Would you take credit for probably having nudged him, because he said that in what was carried in the newspapers, that after this meeting with you, he decided that the government should issue these special ID cards for Venezuelan people here, trying to get either refugee status or asylum seeking.
Solutions are what people always want to find. And to find the right solution is always an important part of a process. Because the evening before, he had raised it in his conversation, saying that there was that there are jobs that Trinidadians no longer want to do. And if there are migrants who want to do those jobs, well, we should be looking at that. So it's not as if I had a closed door. He had already started to rethink what was necessary. What we had was a very productive conversation that allowed some new options to come to the table, and that we could work together to find those solutions.
Yeah. All right. You mentioned Archbishop Emeritus Harris a moment ago. Are there, because he was working on a set of programs himself, initiatives and ideas and so on.
Yes.
To what extent you've taken up some of them and brought with you into your agenda now?
So there are two big ones. He wrote a pastoral letter on hospitality, which I think is a wonderful document. And this year the church is focusing on the three H's: hymns, hospitality, and homilies. And so we're taking up the hospitality from his pastoral letter and moving it forward towards what we need as a diocese. And that's why the work with the refugees is so important. That's why the work with the prisoners is so important. And that's the second one I'm taking up from him. He had started this whole campaign to bring to consciousness in the country the plight of the prisoner, and especially those on remand yard, and those who, having spent 5 or 6 years, get their trial and get a sentence of 3 or 4 years. So they've spent more time in prison than the sentence would have given them, only because they're poor. And he had collected a list of names and got signatures and really started a movement towards getting this thing addressed. So this is another one that that I have taken up and that I'm working on. And that's why this week I'm going to go back into the prison to hear confession. And I'm going to go every month, just to meet inmates and to listen and be available. Because that was my second transformational experience, going into the prison and seeing the dark side of our reality. That there are 1,000 prisoners there who are in prison only because they're poor. So poverty has become the crime in their case. Because if they had the money, if they had a property that was free of debt, they would be able to get bail and be out of prison. So the crime, whatever else they are accused of doing, has really become poverty, because after 5 or 6 years living in prison, you're a prisoner. And then getting a job after that, no matter what, because your resume has this gap. So no matter what you do. So this structure of injustice that is taking place in the country, and we're all kind of blind to it and not willing to engage it, or just happy until somebody in your family is in the same position, and then you understand how badly it works. But no, as a country, I think we can do better. And again, hospitality, again, humanity. And it's really the darker side of our justice system.
Yeah, and in the prisons and among people who'd been inside and now outside, there's a growing movement about what is called the people who are described as lifers.
Yes.
And there's a movement to try and get some understanding. When somebody has done their time, they have paid their debts.
When is life?
Yeah.
So when I went to the prison, I came away with 3 major things. The first one is those on remand. And the 1,000 who have not been charged could have bail, but don't have the money. The second big one is the whole thing of the lifers. That and a lot of them spoke to me, because some of them were sentenced to be there at least 20 years. Now they're going on 25, 28, 40 years, and there's no intervention on their behalf. Yeah. So that they themselves are in a very awkward position, because there is no end to this thing. And the third is the fact that the Mercy Committee has not met, and nobody has been released for 13 years. The only people released have been released because of very poor health conditions, but not because of good behavior. What that means is that a lifer who has just come and just been sentenced, looking on at the older guys, is going to ask himself, well, why am I going to be good? If there's no reward for being good, why am I going to be good? That puts an incredible strain. These 3 things put an incredible strain on the prison staff, because now you have to find ways to keep these guys being good in the absence of any reward or hope at the end. Yeah. And that creates a real dynamic in the prison system that makes it tough to do real reform.
Okay, so let's talk about some of your own, I would say, sort of indigenous projects that you probably came into the position with. Mm-hmm. What are some of those?
So I spent a lot of time in this first year listening to the parishes and listening to Catholic education. Um, and I mean significant hours and days in both areas. We did a pastoral plan, and the pastoral plan, so it took most of the year to do it. So it focuses on 5 major areas: the Catholic parish, the Catholic school, families, leadership in church and society, the parish, and the youth. What we've come up with is that our major objective is to bring the millennial plus generation, that's X, Y, Z, A, to bring them to active participation in the faith and to facilitate them as a deliberate way forward, because that generation has had the greatest change in the last 80 years. So even myself and those for 50 years before me would have had a similar sense of Catholicism. But between Generation X, then Y, Z, and A, each one has had very significant change because of the rapid change in technology.
Yeah.
And this rapid change of technology has driven a change in consciousness of the human. It has brought a change in how we see the world, how we communicate, of the value system. So it's really nearly a major rupture with all the things that you could have counted on from the past. And to understand the pastoral challenge is to first understand how different the context is. And if you understand this new context, which is still emerging and evolving and quicker and quicker, this requires, it's like going to a new continent and discovering that new continent with a different language, a different mentality, a different experience. We have been treating our young people as if they are extensions of our old people and us, and they're just not. And so this is really a primary missionary endeavor. And what we're saying is we have to do this through the Catholic parish, the Catholic schools, with the clergy and the families as a great support in doing this initiative. So that, and all of that requires leadership. So that's how we kind of pull together all the pieces. But we have to find a way to understand this brand and brave new culture of the Millennial Plus and really engage it deeply and profoundly with the wisdom that we have.
Right, so how excited are you by what you see as the participation of the millennials as part of the church? The numbers are encouraging, or the needs work on that? Or?
We have a significant number of millennials who are very committed to the church. And I don't think they're going anywhere, but I think if we don't do something very significant, they'll start drifting, because the church would seem less and less a home for them. But it's the ones just below that, Generation Z, which is born in around 2000, 2003. They're the ones that are not seeing the sense of this thing at all. Because they're the ones who are saying, why? And then the older people with the catechists have been trained in very stock answers, but those answers are not touching this generation at all, because they need an answer that goes at least 3 levels down. You need to be able to say, well, why? You say, well, because so and so and so, and this is because, and you go to the next. And then if they can't get that depth of answer, they're not going to even listen to you. And then whatever answer you give, you have to be able to model it by how you're actually going to be living and the way that your life is witnessing. Because if it's not getting 3 levels down and not being witnessed, they're not going to hear.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the greatest challenge and excitement for me, because I see many people are saying, oh, this generation, no. For me, this generation is going to make us honest, make us Christian, and make us everything that we're supposed to be. And they excite me because I see that what they're asking of us is something we should have done of our own accord anyhow, because it's something called old-time discipleship. Yeah. Live what you talk and witness what you're preaching.
Yeah. And that could be explained, and it's not inconsistent with the idea, because sometimes I think about it when it says that the word of God is the same today as it was yesterday, and it will be forever. but as you're saying that there is need to probably tweak is too
No.
fanciful a word,
No,
to
I'll
make
give
it
you
relevant to.
So the first reading from the third Sunday in Ordinary Time in year C, which we're reading now, talks about Nehemiah reading the whole of the law.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say, and then he translated and gave the sense of the reading. And that's what we got. We have to, the law is the law, but we have to translate it so that this culture can hear it. We have to give the sense of it to break it down in a way that it could be heard and understood by the culture. And so and that's, there's a big fancy theological name for it, hermeneutics.
Yes.
The art of interpretation. But that's what we have to do. So we have done it fairly well for the traditionalists and the baby boomers. We kind of know how to do that.
Yeah.
But we haven't done the translation and the sense of it for these generations coming. And that requires a lot more work. And it is that work that we have to do if we are going to be able to find the bridge to the future of the church in Trinidad and Tobago.
So how, to what extent there is a challenge in getting the teams around you spreading out to across all the parishes to do that kind of stuff,
Well,
and to be energized to.
That's where we are now.
Yeah.
So we had an introductory meeting with the priests. We have another one that is coming. We've met the heads of departments, and that was a 2-day meeting, so we really worked it through deeply with the heads of departments, so they understand it. So that's people like family life, youth, communications, social justice, all of our departments. But we've done something else too. We've brought into leadership young people. So we've brought in a millennial to run, to be the delegate for youth and young adults. Because I feel, we can't have old people talking to young people and tell them, but we have to find partnerships. So it's not about now, well, throw away the old people and let's go with it. No, we have to find the partnerships between the generations to be able to pass on both the substance and the sense of the tradition to the generations that are coming. Yeah. But it is, it's going to take us a while, and I know that many priests and many parishes have already become focused on this from before. But it's now a question of how do we deepen this focus and deepen this challenge. But more than that, how do we look at the whole of our parish? And how do we look at the whole of our school? And ask the single question, how do these two great organizations contribute to the formation of the youth to be missionary disciples? And that's the real question that we have to push hard at.
Where's your sense of enthusiasm or frustration probably in making a determination of the progress on that count, on that score?
So the Pastoral Plan kind of pulled together in December. So we launched it January. So this is really new.
Yeah.
Where do I see the pain points? You know that nobody likes change. Nobody likes change. That's the truth. I don't like it. Nobody likes it. So that's one. But the other one, I would say, Jesus had his 7 last words before he died. And I keep telling people, the church has her 7 last words and she'll say it until she dies. We never did it this way before. And so anything that is new is going to be a little bit of a challenge. And here you have so many, it's such a big entity. When I was bishop in Barbados and in St. Vincent, and I was bishop in both of these wonderful countries, the church is very small. 7 parishes in each of those dioceses. I could gather all key people in the church in one room. We could have the conversation, we go back out, and we come back, and we could do lots more quick, immediate check-in and recalibration and go back again. And so we had a monthly meeting with all key people. And so the checking in and the recalibration happened on the fly. With 61 parishes, by the time you get the message to turn left, we're down 3 stops down on the train track. So it is how to think through the processes that we want to do and change, and to put it in a way that we can do some incremental work in building foundations so that people don't feel overwhelmed by what is happening, and at the same time energized and excited to move forward.
Yeah. Is it too early after a year and a little bit to ask about what you may have ticked off on your bucket list? So mission accomplished, mission accomplished.
Work in progress. Work in progress. So a pastoral plan for the diocese tick.
Yeah.
That was done. I said I was going to spend my first year listening, and I think I really did that, because I was engaged both at a parish level, schools. I've traveled the country in the first year, and tried to be generous in going out and seeing what the outlying areas are. I was in Tobago 3 times last year, because I want to make sure that I touch Tobago, because they always feel as if, well, everything is a Port of Spain or Trinidad. Well, San Fernando feel everything is Port of Spain, and they feel everything is Trinidad. So I want to make sure I get past the Caroni, I get past the lighthouse, I get past Aranguez and the airport, to really touch communities and meet people. And that has been a very rich and wonderful experience. And I don't want to say tick, because I think that has to be an ongoing experience and part of my ministry, to really be out there and reach to, and hear people in their own terms.
Yeah.
What are the other big ones that we have done? I mean, there are some small things that we have done. So Catholic education, we now have 19 projects that are not small, that we are evaluating and deciding which of these 19 go forward first, second, third, or not at all. And that's where we are with that. And that's after a year of very hard work on Catholic education. I mean, there's a thing on using technology to redo the classroom, because a lot of our kids Ken Robinson says, when children are interested, education happens. And a lot of our children are not interested when they go to school, because what they're meeting is not interesting to them. And this generation is born with an iPad in one hand and an iPhone in the next hand, and they've come out with this technology thing. So this is something that we'll start this year as an experiment in working together with Nicholas Gomez, Lightbulb, who has this thing that is going already. So we're going to experiment with that. We've had a pilot last year that is ongoing for this year, so this semester, with Tim Conway. When a child comes at 5 years old to enter a school, if they come from a poor community, 2 things are challenging. First, they might not have had all the nutrition that was required for the development of the brain and the body. And second, they might not have had all the stimulation that is required for the development of the brain and to prepare the brain to be ready for language. So many children come at 5 with their brains not ready for language because of these 2 major reasons, and many other smaller reasons. So Dr. Tim Conway has this method of teaching that changes the neural pathways and makes different connections in the brain so that it readies the brain for language, and then it teaches children how to read without starting with alphabet. So it starts with sound, with the shape of your mouth, and recognizing sound, shape of your mouth, and symbols. So it kind of opens the brain pathways to be ready for language and for numeracy. And we're hoping, praying, he has the science behind this, that if this works, this will be one of the foundational things that we will do in terms of getting our children ready for language. And then you go to Jollyphonics, where they're now ready, and then you take them to the next stage. And then because so many of our children at CXC don't know how to read and write, and far less for SCA, and far less for Standard 2. They're not reading and writing. And nobody's asking a question, why are we producing so many people out of a school system who are not reading and writing? And if you can't read and write, you can't do maths, you can't do science, you can't do English. There's a lot of things you can't do. Now, for me, this has been a major passion because I'm dyslexic, very dyslexic. I know it is to go through a school system where you're struggling with language and still have to cope with everybody else. So for me, I want to ensure that the children get the best way to language first. And then that foundation, we build on that, and then education can start happening, because now you have children's interest. When a child can't read and is getting buffed because they're not reading, what the child is going to do is lock off from school. Yeah. I could tell you how to do it. I could write the manual. But so that's another. So the projects we're talking about are huge undertakings that if they kind of work together and come together at some stage in this, it would be revolutionary for education in our schools.
Yeah. Well, that is what you just said there. That's a profound introduction into this question about, you say, but people aren't talking about it. We're talking about education, but all of that you said there is contained somewhere in the report of this Curriculum Committee on Education, which we've been talking about before we came on the air. Yeah. And one of the things it says in there, with reasons having to do with what you talk about, the difficulties with learning language and learning to read and so on. And the report sums up some of that to say that, well, you know, there are Catholic schools which are at the top of the heap in different parts of the country, but there are others that are what they call this watch list of schools that are not doing as well as they can.
Good.
Or they should.
And now you have to map that statement geographically, because the Catholic schools at the top of the heap are the Catholic schools in the Port of Spain area and in some communities that are thriving. Tabaquita has done an experiment that I love it. They have taken hydroponics, and Lloyd Best said that sometimes school is pan in school. Well, hydroponics is school, and school is hydroponics. And the hydroponics, the kids are so excited about it that the teacher will say something, no, you have to do this exercise first and then we go into the hydroponics. Or go into the hydroponics and then teaching maths and all sorts of other things, science and agricultural science, all kinds of things. So but it has excited the kids. Our schools that are failing are mostly in communities that are failing. And the problem is like the drop of water in the ocean. If the ocean is not healthy, the drop of water is not going to be healthy. So we're beating up on the school, but we have a bigger societal problem of the community. And then we have another challenge of the parenting styles in those communities. We are so negative in our parenting. We correct people by shaming. But why are you so bad? We call people names that are insulting as pet names. And this whole negativity that the child digests from knee-high shapes the way the child sees himself. So we have to deal with the parenting. We have to deal with the wider community, because if the children in that community who come out with some O levels cannot get a job, why is anybody going to struggle through education if there's no way out of that? So we have to deal with the wider community. Then we have to look at and see how are these communities being assimilated within the larger Trinidad and Tobago. So that project, and that's another project that we're looking at very seriously. There's an East Port of Spain project that we're now going to expand to all the schools we have in troubled areas, to really take on this school as a learning environment to assist the community for development. Because unless the community is willing to be transformed and the parents are willing to be transformed, the children themselves will not have the kind of support that they will need to a future to make the sacrifices with education.
Yeah. Something what you said there in that response, the ways of parenting of, let's say, the 50s and the time when I was growing up, no longer relevant.
They're damaging. I don't think it's a question of, they passed the sell-by date, and they're now toxic. They're now toxic. And I don't want to go back to how we did it then and the wheres and whys of it, but now it is not, it damages children. And so it inhibits children from finding their truest and fullest potential. And therefore, we can't find a way. I don't know that we'll find a way in those communities without helping the parents. Gladwell did a wonderful study on failure and success in education
Malcolm
across
Gladwell.
yes across the money line, and he said, poor children and rich children came to the same school, and at the end of the term they did as they did on the bell curve. There's no difference between rich and poor on the bell curve. They went home for holidays and they came back. The rich kids came back with increased learning. The poor kids came back dropping some of what they had. And then they went for the next term, now with this separation, went home for another holiday. Went home for another holiday. The gap is widening in the holidays. Because a middle class or rich family is going to make sure that child is reading a book, goes to a camp, gets stimulation, does some learning things. And a poorer community, what's happening in the holiday is the child is really watching television and doing nothing that is really stimulating brain activity. And so the holidays is really where children, where the money separates the education. But in the classroom, both work well.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit now about who Charles Jason Gordon is as a person. Your personality. A lot of people don't know, a lot about what that is.
Charles Jason Gordon is a sinner who happened to be called by God to lead this church in this time.
Yeah.
Who, really, my deepest sense of my identity is really as a person who God has loved for what reason I can't understand, but God has loved, and that experience of being loved by God is really where my defining characteristics are. If you want to go more than that, I read widely. I try to do at least 2 books a month. Some months I do that, some months I do 3. I try to read in very different veins: management studies, science, theology, spirituality, good novels. I try to take spectrum in the reading. I love kayaking. That's my go-to place when I have a morning with some time. I have a kayak here in Cocorit, and I would head up to the Hyatt or down to 5 Islands. I don't know.
Not in this, what do you call it, zip lining and.
No. My life is pretty much a dedication to the church and to the things that are important for the kingdom of God. And that's why, like, when I was installed on the 27th of December, on the 20th of December, I went downtown to those living on the streets and spent my morning there and tried to understand what was happening with them. And I've had several meetings between St. Vincent de Paul and the mayor to talk about how can we work to move the question or the conversation on homelessness to the next stage. Because it's terrible in a society like ours that we have that kind of challenge. Those are the things that really get me interested and excited.
Yeah, one question. How do you separate, what you have to do in terms of, meeting the ministry and try and read 3 books a month?
Well, so most of my, and I have to use in the scare quotes, most of my reading is done in Audible and Kindle. So it's always with me.
Yeah.
So I leave, as I did, to go to Cuba on Saturday. That's a 40-minute read on the way and a 40-minute read on the way back. Because I'm in my little cocoon, and I'm reading and thinking through what is being read.
Yeah.
So a lot of my travel time is reading time. On an evening, if I have an evening with nothing, I'll do some reading there. So yes, I find my way to have the spaces to do things. But what I try to do is try to prioritize my time by the things that I consider most important. it's a fight in the schedule, but I'm going to go to prison once a month for the next 6 months until I've gone to all the prisons a second time. So I went in December, and I'm going to go again now. It's a fight in the schedule, but I do it. Spending time nurturing vocations with young priests or seminarians. These are things that are, for me, vital in terms of not only the ministry as an obligation, but my sense of purpose and vocation, and my sense of what God is asking of me to do.
Yeah, and it's not difficult to, or do you have to make an effort? I'm asking the question sort of rhetorically, because I believe that you don't have to make an effort to show people genuineness.
Work is what you have to work at,
Yes.
Things you love to do can't be work.
Yes.
And most of what I do are things I love to do. And the love comes from a sense of purpose and a sense of vocation, a sense of this is what I feel God has called me to do. And so because it's coming from there, it is really flowing out of something that I really feel passionate about. So it's going to happen, and I'm going to do my best at what I put my hand to.
Yeah. Becoming Archbishop of Port of Spain, becoming the leader of the church, isn't something that somebody just gets picked out of nowhere, plucked out of anywhere. There must have been, from your family upbringing, from what you would have studied, the things you would have pursued in the life, would that was on a sort of trajectory?
Well, I tell people that most of what I need in life, I learned in Fatima College. We had a principal, Clive Panton, who really turned education into a very different thing. He introduced an activity period on a Wednesday afternoon where you could go and do anything. So I did auto mechanics, I did plumbing, I did things that I was intrigued about. I wanted to know how an engine worked and why it worked. But then I also taught life saving. And so in Fatima, I became a leader. Through Scouts, I led the troop. Because I was a lifeguard, the groups couldn't go out to do field trips by the sea unless I was going with them.
Yeah.
So that kind of shaped me for leadership and shaped me in terms of understanding how you give back and the way you live your life as a contribution to the bigger things.
Yeah.
And so all of that, I would say, was foundation. My family is foundation for that. Mom and dad were always very keen in my upbringing, my values, my education. I remember when I was 11, Dad would wake me up in the morning to read nice children books because my reading was way behind, and that engagement really spoke about his commitment to me and his interest in my development. And so my family, the school, Living Water Community, which was the community I entered, was a whole other formation process that formed me with because I did so much social ministry. Marian House, Fountain of Hope, working with the people on the fringe of society, Duncan Street, that became part of my consciousness. So all these three big forces, the Fatima, my family, Fatima, and the community are really kind of what shaped me to who I am.
Yeah.
Plus great education.
You'd say that, and you describe the education system overall in Trinidad and Tobago is great.
So, well, my experience in Fatima was excellent. They didn't know about dyslexia, and I still managed to come out with A levels. That has to be excellent. But also, I did my master's in Belgium, in one of the big Catholic colleges in Louvain, and a doctorate in Heathrow College in London, the Jesuit school in the University of London. So I've had great exposure to help me to be formed to do the things that I'm doing.
Yeah. You mentioned the dyslexia, well, for the second time a while ago, but you talked about how you overcame it, if that is the correct term. And you want to share a bit about how you...
Sure. And I've done this with many teachers and groups of teachers to help them to understand what it's like being dyslexic in a classroom. So through Fatima, I made it through because the school saw me as valuable. And so that kept my self-esteem intact. because in the classroom I was very good verbally, but the exam horrible. So the teacher saw there was something in me, but they didn't get it back in the exams because the language was not clear enough. The handwriting was so terrible. All these other things. But I made it through that. In seminary, similarly, Father Henry Charles saw something in my thinking that he thought was interesting and probed it and pushed me, really pushed me hard. Austin Milner told me one day, the only reason I bother to read your scripts is because I know there'll be something valuable in it, but it's a pain to read. But then once technology came, I use technology now for my reading, my learning. So everybody knows me as a highly technological bishop. Because the technology became the substitute for the skills that the dyslexia has kind of inhibited in me. So when audiobooks came out, well, I thought I died and went to heaven. When Kindles came out, this is wonderful. A tablet where I can type rather than have to handwrite. All of these things kind of compensated for what I would have lost by being dyslexic. But there's the opposite side. The dyslexic's brain has to problem solve constantly from 7 and 8 years old, because you want to write this word, but you don't know how to spell it. So what's the better word that you could write that you could spell? So you're problem solving constantly. So my brain developed this thing of problem solving. So you show me a problem, I'm showing you 10 solutions. People say, let's think outside the box. I say, what box are we talking about? There are no box. So the brain developed differently. So dyslexia is only a problem really in secondary school, primary and secondary school. After that, it actually is a boost and a help, because the brain sees things so differently that I look at things and I look at it differently from many other people.
Yeah. So have you been able to had opportunity to pass that kind of orientation on to people who deal with dyslexics?
So many parents would just send their kids to me at different stages and say, and I would say, if they're in my office, and say, you see that? What is that? It's a certificate. What is it? So he's a doctor. They say, okay, I'm dyslexic. I have that. Now let's talk about dyslexia. And then I'll tell them, and by the time I'm 3 minutes in, I've described to them what they're experiencing in the classroom. They relax. Because at last, somebody actually understands what I'm experiencing. And that for a child is miraculous. Because the thing is, you don't have the language to describe because the parent hasn't experienced that. And the teacher doesn't understand it, so the teacher is not helping. Today we have a lot more support around ADHD, dyslexia, all these learning challenges. In my days, it didn't. You just grunted and did what you had to do. So I worked twice as hard as many of my friends.
Yeah. When I was in high school, that was in the mid to late 1960s, give you a sense of
just before me.
But that time, and there was all this turmoil in different parts of the world and in the United States, and there were these two Jesuit brothers, the Berrigan brothers.
Oh, yes.
Right. And I'm so reading a lot of stuff about them and the activism they were engaged in, and after that, I got the sense that Jesuits were at the top of the heap, in the Catholic international, so to speak. So when you said you went to a Jesuit university,
Two.
Two. Okay.
Louvain in Belgium was a Jesuit university. Hydroponics in London was a Jesuit university.
Yeah. And what is the special about the Jesuits that they become, activists and sort of the conscience of the world in a lot of respects, and the conscience of the church?
At the forefront of climate change, of migrants and refugees, of all the big social issues. You'd find Jesuits there. I think that there are two things in it. St. Ignatius developed an understanding of how to help the modern person connect with God in as modernity had emerged with printing press and company. And so his spiritual exercises really anchors people to the depth of the spiritual life, which is a new a new phenomenon. The Benedictines, it was an agricultural society, and so it kind of just happened over time. Modernity disrupted it. And Ignatius was a gift that he brought, was these spiritual exercises. That is a kind of an anchoring in a consciousness that helps a person to really find their deeper center. And then he got them to study. So a typical Jesuit could be 15 to 17 years or 13 to 17 years before they finally profess. They'll do a degree in something, they do a degree in philosophy, a degree in theology, they go out and do something else, they go and do something else, they come back, they get ordained, they still do something, they still do something. Then there was a time when anything that the Pope wanted to know about anything, he'll call the Master General of the Jesuits and say, I want to know about physics or chemistry or biology or medicine. And the Master General had somebody who was a leading expert in that field. And so no matter what the field was, because they have Jesuit universities all over the world. So Master General just call an expert in and say, we need to know this, and he will get it. Yeah. So they are intellectuals, but they're not intellectuals in an ivory tower. They're also deeply rooted in faith, in God, and in spirituality. And so they tend to be both at the highest end of the intellectual and at the extreme end of the advocacy for the church and for the poor and for human rights and for all these things.
Yeah. God willing, what are some of the parts of a legacy you'd like to leave when that time comes, when you retire or
that's always a trick question when you have so many years to go, you know. Yeah. Education. And I know that my predecessor, Archbishop Harris, put a lot of emphasis into education. It really triggered his mind. And I would like to take that and carry it to another place so that we move the education system up significantly. Missionary discipleship, that we really address the challenge that many Catholics are experiencing of feeling on the periphery of the church. And that needs addressing by a very good Jesuit model of getting people to spirituality and anchoring them in the core and center of their being where God is. And then from that anchor, people will want to be engaged in the mission of the church. What we've done for 50 years is kind of ought, should, would, and obedience, and shame, and pain. And that's not working anymore. It has to come from inside out. And that means we have to offer people a rich, complex, deep spiritual encounter with God, the formation, and the ways of living that go with that. And I think I'd like to see that. I'd like to see the millennial generation now much more active in the church, and therefore, in years to come, them passing that on to the generations that are coming after, so that we really have this conscious transmission of faith from generation to generation.
And there are ways of doing that you probably started to try and inspire.
Yes. Formation. So one of the things we're looking at for this year is bringing some millennials, hiring them through parishes and vicariates, training them in theology, giving them a formation, and at the same time having them doing the youth groups, the catechetics, the works in that kind of formation work in the parish, so that they have a better formation to help those who are already engaged in those ministries.
Yeah. How do you respond to the people who continue to say, well, the church has lost its place, the church has lost its voice in society?
People have a mouth, they can say anything they would like. On one hand, we're certainly not in the Fimbarayan days where Fimbarayan spoke and everybody got afraid, and I would not want to be in those days. I think the power of the church is not in force or power. It is in persuasion for the sake of building a civilization of love and a humanity that is highly conscious of its vocation and highly conscious of what it is to be human in this era. And I think that that's where the power of the church is. And therefore, I don't see the power coming because you are Archbishop. I see the power coming because you can persuade, because you can witness, because you can pull the best of the tradition to the fore and help people see the significance of our tradition for the current issues of our day.
Yeah. At Mass last Sunday, the father in Santa Rosa, he was making the point that so he comes from Tobago, and he said, well, this Catholicism in Tobago is not as humongous, not as pervasive as it is in Trinidad. When he came here, he found, there's a Catholic community here that he didn't understand, but he found that doing some survey on his own, that he said a lot of people are Catholics because they feel that, it's a prestigious organization in Trinidad. You could get something from it rather than contributing.
Correct. And that's what we have to change. People wanting to be Catholic by their commitment to Christ.
Right. Archbishop Charles Jason Gordon, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy. God bless.
Good. Well, we hope you enjoyed this. There'll be more to come with the Archbishop. Stay on this channel.